My brother was the coldest man in the north of England, and I watched a flooded river make a fool of him in 3 days flat. I should say at once that I loved him, that I still do, and that nothing I am about to tell you is meant unkindly. But you must understand what Alaric was before that spring, or the rest of it will make no sense at all. He was the Duke of Wexmoor, and the county called him the coldest duke in the north, and for once the county was not exaggerating. I had seen him refuse a dance to a duke's daughter without lifting his eyes from his glass. I had seen a matchmaking mother of considerable ambition retreat from a single sentence of his the way a candle retreats from a draught. He had buried our father and our mother within a year of each other when he was 26, and he had taken the estate and the title and the whole weight of the name onto his shoulders and simply stopped. Stopped laughing, mostly. Stopped hoping, entirely. For a decade he had let it be understood that he would never marry, that the title could go to me and my sons and welcome, and that any woman who imagined otherwise was wasting good daylight. I had long since given up teasing him about it. You cannot tease a stone. So when he announced that we would go north together at the end of that wet March, he to see to a dispute over the mill leases at Wexmoor, I to keep him company because I could not bear London another week. I expected nothing from the journey but bad roads and worse conversation. I did not expect a river. I most certainly did not expect a wife. The rain began south of Grantham and never properly stopped. By the second afternoon the road was a brown ribbon of mud, and the postboys swore under their breath at every rut, and Alaric sat across from me in the carriage with his hat brim dripping, and his mouth set in that flat line I knew so well, watching the drowned fields go by as though they had offended him personally. "Cheerful country," I said to say something. "It will be worse by nightfall," he answered, and was right because he generally was, which is one of the least lovable things a man can be. It was near dark when we came down the long hill toward the Marl. I heard the water before I saw it, a roar like a crowd, wrong and huge in the quiet. Then the trees opened and there it was, the river up over its banks and swallowing the meadows on both sides, running fast and brown and shining in the last gray light, and where the old stone bridge should have carried us across there was nothing but a churn of foam, and a single broken arch standing up out of the flood like a snapped tooth. The carriage stopped. The head postboy came to the window streaming. "Bridge is gone, your grace. When in the night, they say. There's no crossing the Marl this side of Harby, and Harby's 12 mile off and that road's under 2. He wiped his face. "There's the inn, though, the Marl Bridge. Half the road's fetched up there already." Through the murk I could make out the inn, a long low huddle of light and smoke on the near bank, and the yard before it crammed with carriages and horses and men shouting over the rain. Every soul traveling north that day had come to the same drowned bridge and turned, like water itself, to the one dry place left. "Wonderful," said Alaric. "I want you to hold that word in your mind, because it was very nearly the last unhappy thing my brother said before the whole current of his life changed direction, and he had no more notion of it than the river did. The Marl Bridge Inn was built for the ordinary traffic of the road, and it was, that night, containing something on the order of 4 times its ordinary traffic. The tap-room heaved. Merchants and their clerks, a company of players, 2 families of quality with more baggage than sense, a horse dealer, a curate, a pair of sharp-eyed young men I took for gamblers, and over all of it the landlord, a broad, sweating, harried man named Pockle, moving through the crush with the fixed grin of a man who has already given away more beds than he owns and knows the night is only beginning. Alaric did what Alaric always did, which was to stand very still in the doorway and let the room notice him. It did. He had a way of arriving that emptied a space around himself, the crowd folding back without quite knowing why, and within a minute Pockle had abandoned 3 lesser guests and come scurrying, bowing, wringing his apron. "Your grace and honor, a terrible honor on such a night. We're that full, sir. I won't deceive you. There's not a bed in the house I've not promised twice over." "You will find something. said my brother in the voice that found things. And Pockle, God help him, did. There was, it emerged, one private parlor left at the end of the passage, with a small bedchamber opening off it, held back, he confessed, against exactly such an arrival as ours, for one never knew. A parlor and one bed. He looked from Alaric to me with an agony of apology, because there were plainly two of us and one of it. "I'll take a chair in the tap room," I said at once cheerfully, because I did not mind and because the alternative was watching my brother mind. Kit Vane can sleep anywhere. He always has. That was settled then. My brother would have the parlor and the little room, I would have a chair by the fire and a great deal of other men's conversation, and the whole matter would have ended there, unremarkable, a wet night on a bad road if it had not been for two things. The first was a dowager. The second was Miss Blythe. I saw Miss Blythe before I knew her name, though I could not afterward have told you what first drew my eye, for she had been built, it seemed, expressly not to draw the eye. She was a young woman of perhaps 22, seated very upright on the hardest bench in the tap-room with a shabby traveling box at her feet and her hands folded on it, wearing a gray gown that had been turned at least once, and a bonnet a season or two behind the fashion, even for a season or two behind. She was not plain, precisely. I have never been able to decide whether she was plain, and I have now had years to consider it. But she had the particular stillness of a person long accustomed to not being looked at, a way of holding herself small and quiet at the edge of a room, as if she had learned that the safest thing in this world was to give it nothing to remark upon. What drew my eye, I think, in the end, was that she was laughing, not aloud. But there was a company of players at the next table telling the tale of their own drowned wagon with great and increasing invention, and I watched Miss Blythe listen to it, her face turned 3/4 away, and I watched the laughter move through her like light under a door, the smallest lift at the corner of her mouth, a bright quickness in the eye, private, entirely to herself, given to no one because no one had ever thought to ask her for it. And I thought, with the idle warmth one feels toward strangers, there is somebody real going to waste in that corner. Then Pockle's boy dropped a tray of pots 2 feet from her, and in the crash and the cursing I forgot her, and went to find my chair. I learned her circumstances later, in pieces, the way one always does. She was the youngest of the 4 daughters of a baronet in Rutland, a man of small fortune and by every account smaller notice for the child who had come last and least of his brood. 3 elder sisters all married, 3 London seasons for verity, each quieter than the one before, and at the end of the 3rd the family verdict, delivered without heat because there was no heat left to deliver. She had not taken. She would not take. And so she was being sent north, that very week, to be companion to a Greytan in Northumberland, a formidable old woman she had met perhaps twice, to fold shawls and read sermons and pour tea for the rest of her natural life, because a girl who does not take must be put somewhere, and there is always an aunt. She was traveling alone, but for a maid who had turned back sick at Stamford, on the public coach, with a box of turned gowns and £11 sewn into her stays, and no more expectation of the future than the road has of the sea it runs toward. That was Miss Verity Blythe, on the night the Marl came up over its banks, the most thoroughly overlooked young woman in the tap-room of a crammed inn, on her way from one place that did not want her to another that merely required her. And in the parlor at the end of the passage sat my brother, the coldest duke in the north, who wanted nothing and required no one, warming his boots at a private fire. The river had put them under the same roof. It took a foolish, ordinary, entirely blameless accident to put them in the same room. Here is how it happened, as near as I have ever been able to reconstruct it, and I have questioned every party to it more than once. There was, among the quality stranded that night, a dowager. Lady Frampton was her name, a widow of large person and larger opinions, traveling north to plague a married son, and she had arrived an hour before us and secured for herself the second-best chamber, and for her companion, a thin, frightened creature named Miss Preing, a truckle bed in a closet adjoining. Lady Frampton was the sort of woman who runs an inn she is only staying in. By 9 o'clock she had rearranged the seating of the taproom, criticized the fire, and made herself the unelected magistrate of everyone's business. And it was into the shadow of this magistracy that poor Verity Blythe wandered when she went, quite reasonably, to ask Pockle where a lone gentlewoman might decently pass the night. Pockle, drowning in guests, told her the truth, that he had no bed, no chair he could promise, nothing but the standing room of a taproom that would grow rowdier as the ale went down and the marooned men grew bored. He said it kindly. He also said, thinking to comfort her, that there was a decent bench in the passage by the parlors where a lady might at least sit out of the worst of the crowd, and that the passage was quiet, being at the far dark end of the house. So Miss Blythe took herself and her box to the passage bench and sat, and meant to sit there all night, upright and unremarked, as she had sat through 3 seasons of ballrooms. And she would have. But the passage was cold, colder than the taproom, and along it there was a door standing an inch ajar with firelight and warmth leaking out of it, and after an hour of shivering she did what any cold and weary creature does. She moved, half asleep, toward the warmth. She thought she swore to me afterward, and I believe her entirely, for she was the most truthful person I have ever known. She thought it was a public parlor standing empty. She pushed the door. She saw a fire and a settle and no one, for my brother had stepped through into the little bedchamber to see to his own boots. And Miss Verity Blythe, cold to the bone and past caring, sat down on the far end of the settle to thaw her hands, and within 2 minutes was fast asleep. That is the whole of the crime. A cold girl fell asleep by the wrong fire. What made it a scandal rather than an accident was that Lady Frampton, prowling the passage near midnight in search of Miss Preing and a hartshorn draught, saw the parlor door, my brother's parlor door, open a hand's width, and looked in, as she looked into everything, and beheld a young woman asleep on the settle, and coming through the inner door at that very moment, the Duke of Wexmore in his shirt-sleeves. I have often thought the whole of my brother's happiness turned on the exact angle of that door. I was asleep in my chair when the noise reached me, not a shout, worse than a shout, the low, fast, urgent murmur of a scandal being born, running through the taproom table to table like fire through stubble. The Duke, a young woman, his private room, his shirt-sleeves alone, at midnight the door well ajar. But what is ajar, I ask you? I came awake all at once with that cold drop in the stomach. A man knows means his family is in it, and I was up and down the passage before I had my coat straight. The scene, when I reached it, had already arranged itself into tableau. Lady Frampton stood foursquare in the parlor doorway like justice with the scales knocked off, filling it, her voice pitched to Carrie, which it did, to the taproom and probably to Harby. Behind her, a growing audience craned. Within, my brother stood by the inner door with his coat now hastily on, and an expression I had not seen on his face in 10 years, not cold at all, but thrown off his feet. A man who had walked into his own parlor and found the century had changed. And on the settle, just waking, blinking, understanding by degrees the size of the thing she had walked into, sat the gray-gowned girl from the corner of the taproom, one hand still out toward the dying fire. And I need hardly say, Lady Frampton was declaiming, what construction the world will place upon it. A young person, your private apartment, the hour. She gestured at my brother's cravat, which was, I grant, undone, the state of undress. I have my duty, your grace, painful as it is. I saw what I saw. And there is not a soul in this house who will not have heard of it by morning, for I could not in conscience prevent, that is, one cannot suppress. She was, I understood, promising to suppress nothing while pretending to lament that she could not. Madam, said my brother. Just that. But Verity Blythe was on her feet now, white as her collar, and she spoke before he could go on, and it was the first time I heard her voice, and I remember thinking even in that dreadful moment, what a clear voice. Why has no one ever mentioned that she has such a clear voice? It is entirely my fault, she said. The gentleman was not even in the room. I thought it empty. I was cold. I came in to sit by the fire and I fell asleep, and I have never in my life spoken to him. That is the whole of it, and I will say so to anyone, and it is the truth. It was, of course, the truth. It was also, I saw at once with a sinking heart, precisely the sort of truth that no one wished to hear and everyone would decline to believe. A girl explaining that she had innocently fallen asleep in a duke's private parlor is a girl who has, in the eyes of the world, already lost. Lady Frampton's face confirmed it. A small, satisfied tightening, the look of a woman whose evening has exceeded her hopes. "I am sure," said Lady Frampton, in a voice that was sure of the opposite, "that we all wish to think the very best of everyone. I only say what I saw. And I say it, my dear, for your own protection, which is what such women always say while they are cutting a young woman's throat." My brother had not moved. He was looking at Miss Blythe, not at Lady Frampton, not at the crowd, at the girl, with an odd, arrested attention, as if she were a sum that had not come out the way he expected and he was going back through the figures. When he finally spoke, it was very quietly, and to her, and not at all to the room. "You are cold," he said. Of all the things, the whole passage full of scandal and ruin, and my brother looked at a shivering girl and remarked that she was cold. And do you know, it undid Lady Frampton's whole performance in a stroke, because it was so plainly, stupidly true, and so plainly not the remark of a man defending a seduction. Miss Blythe looked down at her own hands, still half raised toward the fire, and something crossed her face, surprise, I think, the plain surprise of a person unused to being noticed at all, let alone noticed for the true thing. "I am rather," she admitted. He took his own coat off, the coat he had just put on, and crossed the room and put it round her shoulders and stepped back, and turned at last to Lady Frampton, and I braced myself for the cold, for the terrible flat voice that dismissed matchmaking mammas like candle smoke, and I thought, here it comes. God help the girl. He will freeze the whole passage and walk away and leave her ruined in his wake without meaning the smallest harm, because that is what he does, that is what he is. I was wrong. It was the first of many times that spring I was wrong about my brother, and I have never been so glad to be. "You are correct, madam," said Alaric, "that the world will place a construction upon this. You may spare yourself the labor of spreading it. I will spread it myself and save you the trouble." A ripple ran through the crowd. "This lady and I are betrothed. We quarreled foolishly over the arrangements of the journey. She left the coach. The flood stranded us both here, and she came to my parlor to be reconciled and fell asleep waiting for me, being, as you rightly observe, cold and tired and ill-used by a long day's travel and a longer engagement to a man who does not deserve her patience. There is your scandal, Lady Frampton. A betrothed couple reconciled. Print it where you like." You could have heard a moth land. Lady Frampton's mouth opened and shut. And Verity Blythe turned and looked at my brother with an expression of such total, undisguised astonishment that I very nearly laughed aloud in the middle of the disaster, because it was the face of a woman who has just heard herself become engaged to a stranger, and cannot for the life of her decide whether she has been rescued or abducted. She was, I would learn, a young woman of remarkable presence of mind. She did not contradict him. She stood there in his coat, in the ruins of her respectability, with a duke's outrageous falsehood hanging in the air, and she looked at him for the space of 3 breaths, and then she said in that clear voice, perfectly steady, "He is quite right that he does not deserve my patience. On that point at least we are agreed." And the passage, which had been holding its breath to condemn her, laughed, a startled, delighted, whole-throated laugh, the crowd turning in an instant from a mob to an audience, and Lady Frampton, robbed, deflated, muttered something about the hour and retreated, and the great scandal of the Marl Bridge Inn was, in that moment, not a ruin at all but a love-match temporarily interrupted, and the most romantic thing to happen on the Great North Road in a generation. I got my brother alone at last near 2 in the morning, in the little bedchamber, with the door shut and Miss Blythe installed in the parlor under the chaperonage of the landlord's wife, who had been roused and pressed into service, and was thoroughly enjoying herself. "Alaric," I said, "what in the name of God have you done?" He was standing at the black window with his back to me, looking at nothing or at the rain. "Saved a blameless girl from ruin," he said, "at, I should think, no very great cost to a man who was never going to marry in any case. The engagement can be dissolved once the roads are clear and she is safely away north. A broken engagement is a small scar. A night alone in my parlor is a mortal wound. I have traded her a mortal wound for a small scar." It seemed a pause, the least I could do, having left the door ajar. It was a good answer. It was a decent, honorable, characteristically cold-blooded answer, and if I had been a wiser man I would have believed it, because he plainly believed it himself. But I had seen his face when he crossed the room to put his coat round her shoulders, and I had heard the particular note in his voice when he said a man who does not deserve her patience. A note I had not heard from my brother in a decade, the note of a man saying more than he means to and hoping no one catches it. I caught it, but I was fool enough that night to think it nothing. "Of course," I said, "the least you could do. Good night, Alaric." "Good night, Kit." And I went back to my chair by the fire, and my brother stood at his black window a long while more. And in the parlor, a young woman who had been overlooked her whole life lay awake under a duke's borrowed coat, breathing in the strange fact of having been, for one impossible half-hour, the most looked-at person in the north of England. The river held us 3 days. I have thought since that Providence must have a sense of comedy, for it could not have arranged a crueler or a kinder trap. A single day and the fiction of the engagement might have stayed a fiction, dissolved politely and forgotten. A week and they would have wearied of the pretense and each other. But 3 days, 3 long, rain-locked, close-quartered days, with the road impassable in both directions and nowhere in the whole crowded in for a betrothed couple to go but into one another's company. 3 days was exactly the wrong length of time, or exactly the right one. I have never been able to decide. That first morning I came down expecting awkwardness and found, instead, the two of them at breakfast in the little parlor, the landlady dozing respectably in the corner, and my brother asking her a question. I stopped in the doorway. I had not seen Alaric ask another human being a question, a real one, out of curiosity rather than command, in years. He asked them of stewards and lawyers to catch them out. He did not ask them of people, because he was not curious about people, having decided long ago that they were all more or less the same disappointment in different coats. "And did the aunt reply?" he was saying. "She did." Miss Blythe was buttering bread with great concentration. "She wrote that she hoped I was not high-spirited, as she could not abide a high-spirited companion, and that I should bring my own thread." She looked up. "I have never been called high-spirited in my life. I believe it is the only interesting thing anyone has ever suspected of me, and it is not even true." "What are you, then," said my brother, "if not high-spirited?" She considered this seriously, as she considered everything. "Observant," she said at last. "It is what you become when no one is watching you. You watch instead. It passes the time." She returned to her bread. "For instance, I have observed that you have not smiled once in the 4 hours I have known you, and that the landlord is terrified of you, and that you gave your brother the tap-room chair and kept the fire for yourself, which suggests you are either very selfish or that you sleep badly and did not wish him to know it. I have not yet decided which." There was a silence. I stood frozen in the doorway, waiting for the frost, for the flat dismissing voice, for the door to shut in her face. My brother said, "The latter." That was all, the latter 2 words. But he said them the way a man lays down a card he did not mean to play, and Verity Blythe looked at him for a moment with those observant eyes, and then she did the kindest thing, which was to say nothing at all about it, and to pass him the marmalade, and to remark that the players at the next table had spent the whole of the previous evening rehearsing a tragedy, and that she suspected it of being a very bad one. And my brother, I will swear to this on anything you like, My brother very nearly smiled. I ate my breakfast in a sort of wonder, and said little and watched. I should tell you what she was like because you have only had her circumstances, and circumstances are not a person. Verity Blythe was quiet, but her quiet was not emptiness. It was a full room with the door shut. She had spent her whole life at the edge of other people's attention, and she had used the vantage, while her sisters danced and married and were noticed, to become the most watchful, most exactly truthful person I have ever known. She saw everything. She flattered no one, not from pride, but because it had never occurred to her that dishonesty might be useful, no one having ever cared enough about her to require it. She was funny in a way that took you a moment to notice, and then would not let you go. A dry, sidelong, undemphatic wit that she offered to the air and expected no one to catch, so that catching it felt like being let in on a secret. And she was kind in the particular way of people who have not been much treated with kindness themselves, which is to say she gave it as though it were rare and precious, because to her it was. She was, in short, the exact and precise opposite of everything my brother had armored himself against. He had spent 10 years refusing women who wanted his title, his fortune, his consequence, and had grown so used to being wanted for those things that he had forgotten there was any other way to be wanted, or that a person might look at the Duke of Wexmoor and see, of all things, simply a man who slept badly. By the second day, I understood that I was watching something, and did not know its name. The rain went on, the morrow stayed high. The inn settled into the strange, suspended, festival mood of people trapped together with nothing to do. The players gave a scene by the tap-room fire. The merchants got up a whist table. Lady Frampton held sullen court in a corner and glared at the engaged couple whose ruin she had failed to accomplish. And in the little parlor my brother and Miss Blythe talked. I do not know all of what they said. I was not always there, and I was not always wanted, and I had the sense, dim at first, then unmistakable, of being in the way of something that needed no third person. But I was there for some of it, and I will give you what I remember, because it is the heart of the whole matter. I remember her drawing him out about Wexmoor, the estate, the mill leases, the dispute he had come north to settle, and I remember him, who never explained himself to anyone, explaining it all to her, the whole tangle of it, because she asked the right questions, and because she listened as though the answers mattered, and at the end of it she said, "But that is not a legal difficulty at all, your grace. It is that the miller thinks you do not respect him, and a man who thinks he is not respected will fight you in a court of law over a thing he would give you for a kind word. You have been sending him lawyers. You should send him nothing but yourself, and ask his opinion of the water wheel, which he will be longing to give you." And I remember my brother going very still, and then saying slowly, "That is almost certainly correct," in the tone of a man who has been shown the answer to a puzzle he had assumed had no answer, and I remember thinking, "She has just settled in 1 minute a dispute his lawyers have not settled in a year, and she does not even know she has done anything remarkable." I remember him asking her on the second evening whether she was not afraid of the aunt, of the sermons and the shawls and the whole gray life laid out ahead of her. And I remember her being quiet for a long time, and then saying, "I am not afraid of it. I am only sorry about it, rather the way one is sorry about rain. It is not cruel. It is only that I had once thought," and stopping, and my brother saying, "Lo, thought what?" And her saying, with a small laugh at herself, "Nothing. Foolishness. I had thought there might be a life somewhere in which I was of some use to someone who was glad of me. But that is a great deal to ask, and the aunt at least will be glad of the thread." And I remember my brother not saying anything to that at all, but I remember his face, and I remember thinking that a man does not look like that at a woman he intends to be rid of the moment the road dries. And I remember this most of all the third night. It was late, the inn had gone quiet. I had come to the parlor to say something forgettable to my brother and had stopped again in the doorway, because they had not heard me and I could not make myself interrupt. The fire was low. The landlady slept in her corner. And they were sitting not close, never close. My brother was too correct and she too careful for that, but turned toward each other across the little hearth. And Miss Blythe was telling him something, some small childhood thing, a story about being the fourth daughter and forgotten at a fair and found at dusk asleep under a gingerbread stall, telling it lightly, as a joke against herself, the way she told everything. And my brother was laughing. I had not heard my brother laugh in 10 years. I had honestly, in my heart, believed the sound was gone, worn away like an inscription, that whatever in him had once been able to laugh had died in the year our parents did and would not come again. And here he was, in a shabby parlor of a flooded inn, on the third night of an engagement he had invented to spare a stranger's honor, laughing, quietly, helplessly, his hand over his mouth as though to catch it, at a small brave joke told against herself by the most overlooked young woman in England, and she was watching him laugh with an expression of such wondering, cautious, disbelieving joy, as though she could not quite trust that she had done it, that she, Verity Blythe, whom no one noticed, had made the coldest duke in the north laugh out loud. I stepped back from the doorway before they saw me. I went and stood in the cold passage a while. I found that my own eyes were not entirely dry, and I told myself it was the smoke, and it was not the smoke. The engagement was a fiction. I knew that. He had said it himself in the little bedchamber at 2 in the morning. The engagement can be dissolved once the roads are clear. A small scar for a mortal wound. An honorable arrangement, coldly reasoned, to be undone the moment its purpose was served. But you cannot dissolve a fact by calling it a fiction, and the fact was this, that somewhere in 3 rain-locked days, over marmalade and mill leases and a story about a gingerbread stall, my brother had woken up. And I did not know how you were meant to put a man back to sleep once that had happened, and I did not think, watching them, that he knew it either. On the 4th morning the rain stopped, and the sun came out, and the morrow began to go down, and the whole terrible machinery of the real world cranked back into motion. I woke to find the inn transformed, the suspended festival over, everyone abruptly a traveler again, servants running, trunks being roped, Paco bowing everyone toward the door with visible relief. The players packed their tragedy. The merchants called for their bills. Lady Frampton departed at 9 in a flurry of ill temper, having got no scandal for her 3 days' trouble, and I confess I stood in the yard and watched her carriage lurch off down the mending road with a satisfaction I am not proud of. The ford at the broken bridge was passable by noon. They said muddy and mean but passable, and the northbound coach that would carry Miss Blythe on to her aunt was to leave at 1. At 1 o'clock. I found my brother in the parlor at 11:30, alone, standing at the window that no longer had rain on it, and I knew from his back what he was going to do, and I knew it was correct, and I hated it. "She goes at 1, he said without turning. "I know. The roads are open. The engagement has served its purpose. Lady Frampton is gone. The story that will follow Miss Blythe north is now a story of a broken engagement to a duke, regrettable but survivable, the kind of thing that in fact does a young woman no harm at all and may do her some good. I will settle a sum on her, quietly, through my man of business, enough that she need not be any aunt's companion ever again unless she chooses it. She will be free, and provided for, and unruined, and she need never see me again." He said it very evenly, the whole reasonable plan, the honorable dissolution, every piece of it correct. "It is the right thing to do." "Yes," I said. "It is." "Then why?" said my brother, and turned around, and I saw his face. "Do I feel as though I am about to do the coldest thing I have ever done in my life, and I have done a great many cold things. I have replayed that moment more times than I can count, and I have never been able to improve upon what I said, because what I said was nothing. I did not say anything. I had spent 10 years wishing my brother would feel something, anything, and now that he did I had the wit at least to keep out of the way of it. I stood there. And I watched Alaric Vane, Duke of Wexmoor, the coldest man in the north, Work it out for himself, slowly, in real time. The way a man works out that the ground he has stood on all his life is not ground at all but ice, and that it is going. She thinks, he said slowly, that I invented the engagement out of kindness, to spare her. She thinks I am counting the hours until I am free of it. Aren't you? No, said my brother, and it came out of him like something torn. No, God help me. I am counting the hours until she is gone and dreading each one. I invented a wife to save a stranger's honor, and somewhere in 3 days the stranger became, she became. He stopped. He was a man who had not said a tender word aloud in a decade. The machinery of it had rusted. I watched him struggle with it. Kit, I have not slept badly since the first night. Do you understand what I am telling you? For 10 years I have not slept, and this week, in a shabby bed in a flooded inn, with the woman in the next room and half of Rutland believing me engaged to her, I have slept like a child, because for the first time since our mother died there is a person in the world whom I would rather see than not see. And she is leaving at 1 o'clock to go and fold shawls for an aunt who told her to bring her own thread, and she believes I want her to go. Then tell her you don't. And have her think I do it out of duty, that I feel obliged because of the parlor, the door, the scandal, that I am offering out of honor what she will believe I do not truly want. He shook his head, sharp. She has spent her whole life being taken because someone had to take her, the fourth daughter. The companion, the girl who must be put somewhere. I will not offer her a marriage she will spend the rest of her life suspecting was another placing somewhere, another duty discharged. She deserves to be chosen, and known to be chosen freely, past all doubt. And I do not know how to make her believe it, because I am a man who has spent 10 years teaching the whole world that I want nothing, and now I want one thing entirely, and I have no language left to say it in. And there, at last, I was of some use to my brother, for the first and perhaps the only time in our lives. Alaric, I said, you are trying to find the words to convince her. Stop. She is the most observant person either of us has ever met. She caught you sleeping badly across a breakfast table. She settled your mill dispute in a minute. She has watched people her whole life because no one watched her. You cannot argue her into believing you, but you cannot lie to her either. She'd see through it in a heartbeat, and she'd see through a pretty speech fastest of all. I put my hand on his shoulder. So don't make her a speech. Give her the one thing that isn't duty and can't be faked, and she'll know it on sight. Give her the truth, badly if you have to. She likes things badly done, I think, better than smoothly. Go and stand in front of her and be as ruined by it as you plainly are, and let her observe you. She'll read it. She reads everything. My brother looked at me for a long moment. When, he said, did you become wise? Just now, I said. It won't last. Go, Alaric, it is 11:45. You have an hour and a quarter, and then she is on a coach, and I do not think either of you comes back from it. He went. I will tell you what I saw, because I saw all of it, having appointed myself, shamelessly, and with no regret whatsoever, to a bench in the inn yard from which the whole of it was visible, on the pretext of seeing to the horses. He found her in the yard, by the northbound coach, where she was watching her shabby box be handed up onto the roof among the other baggage. She had her old gray gown on again, and her bonnet a season behind, and she had made herself small and quiet at the edge of the bustle in the old way, the way of a person returning to being overlooked after 3 strange days of being seen, folding herself back down to the size the world had always allotted her. And I understood, watching her, that she had already begun to grieve it, the parlor, the fire, the marmalade, the man who slept badly, that she had told herself the whole of it was over and was being sensible and brave about it, as she had been sensible and brave about everything, because what else is a fourth daughter ever permitted to be? My brother stopped a few feet from her. She saw him. Something crossed her face and was quickly put away. Hope, I think, hope she did not dare, folded down small like everything else, and she made him a curtsy, correct and quiet. Your Grace, I came to thank you. What you did that first night, you cannot know what it saved me from, and I have not properly said. Miss Blythe, His voice was not the finding voice, the Duke's voice, the voice that emptied rooms. It was low and it was uncertain, and I had never heard it before in my life. I have come to release you from our engagement. I saw her flinch, the smallest flinch, quickly hidden and gather herself, and say steadily, with a dignity that broke my heart a little, of course. I have always understood it was an act of great kindness, meant only to spare me. You need not have troubled to come and say it. I would never have held you to a word spoken to save a stranger. You are free, Your Grace, entirely and with my thanks, and I shall be gone within the hour and never speak of it, I promise you. You misunderstand me, said my brother. She stopped. I am releasing you, said Alaric, from the engagement, the false one, the one I invented in a passage at midnight to save your name, which was an act of kindness, as you say, and which is now discharged, and from which you are this moment entirely free. He took a breath. I saw his hands at his sides, and they were not steady, and this was a man whose hands did not shake. I release you from that. And then freely, owing me nothing, obliged to nothing, with the whole scandal already mended and no earthly reason left to say yes but the true one, I am asking you a second question, which is a different question, and I need you to hear that it is different, because I think it is the most important thing I will ever say, and I am saying it very badly. The whole yard had gone quiet, the postboys had stopped, even the horses seemed to wait. Miss Blythe, Verity, I have not slept a whole night through in 10 years, and this week I slept, because you were in the next room. I came north to win a dispute, and you settled it for me in a minute with a kindness I had forgotten men could use. You made me laugh 3 nights ago, and I heard the sound come out of me like something I had buried, and I have wanted to hear you do it again every hour since. You told me you had once hoped there might be a life somewhere in which you were of use to someone who was glad of you. His voice caught. He let it. I am that someone. I am so glad of you that I do not know what to do with it. I have no practice. I have spent a decade being cold precisely so that I would never have to feel a thing this size, and I have failed entirely in 4 days over marmalade, and I would not undo 1 hour of it. I am not asking you to marry me out of honor. The honor is settled. I am asking because I want you, Verity Blythe, whom the whole world has somehow contrived not to see, and whom I cannot now imagine going a single day without seeing. I am asking because I choose you freely past all doubt, and I will spend my life proving I meant it if you will only not get on that coach. That is the second question. You may observe me as long as you like before you answer it. I know you will. I am counting on it. And Verity Blythe, who had been overlooked her whole life, who had learned to watch because no one watched her, who trusted nothing that could be faked and saw through every kindness offered from duty, stood in that muddy inn yard and did exactly what he had asked. She observed him. She looked at him for a long, long moment, the longest of my life, and I think of his, her clear eyes going over his face the way they had gone over everything, reading him, checking the figures, weighing the true against the false with the whole unerring instrument of a person who has spent 22 years learning to tell the difference. And whatever she saw, the shaking hands, the caught voice, the man ruined and glad to be ruined and utterly unable to hide it because he had never learned how, she believed it. I saw the moment she believed it. I saw the folded down thing inside her, the hope she had never once been allowed to hold at full size, come open at last, all the way, like something unfurling into light. Your Grace, she said, and her voice was not quite steady now either, I have been observing you for 4 days, and I will tell you what I have concluded since you ask. A breath. I have concluded that you are not cold at all and never were. I have concluded that you sleep badly because you have been lonely for 10 years and too proud to say so. And I have concluded, the smallest lift at the corner of her mouth, the private laughter I had seen that first night in the tap-room, offered now at last to someone to him, that a man who takes off his own coat in a freezing passage and puts it round a stranger, and then invents a whole engagement rather than let her be shamed, and then comes back 4 days later to make quite sure she knows he means it, that such a man is either the most elaborate liar in England, or he is telling me the truth. And I have decided he is telling me the truth. I decided it, in fact, somewhere around the marmalade. I only did not dare to say so, because no one has ever chosen me for anything in my life, and I did not think it could possibly be beginning with a duke, on a Tuesday in the mud. "It is beginning with a duke," said my brother unsteadily, "on a Tuesday in the mud. Get down from the coach, Verity, please." "I am not on the coach," she pointed out. "I am standing in the yard." "You are very anxious for a man who has just been accepted." "Have I been accepted?" "You have been accepted," said Verity Blythe, and my brother, the coldest duke in the north, closed the distance between them and took both her cold hands in his and did not, being who he was, do anything more improper than that, in a public yard, before the horses and the post-boys and his own foolish grinning brother. But he bent his head over her hands, and she leaned the smallest degree toward him, and the sun was out for the first time in a week. And I got up off my bench and went to see about calling the coach off, because Miss Blythe would not be needing it, and I found I could not see the coachman very well for a moment, and it was still not the smoke, there being no smoke. And I did not care who knew it. They were married from Wexmoor that summer. Not from her father's house, the baronet in Rutland, informed that his overlooked fourth daughter had, on her way north, contrived to become the Duchess of Wexmoor, wrote a great many warm letters very quickly, and my brother read them and set them aside and did not answer, and Verity did not ask him to, which is one of the 1,000 small ways they suited each other. She was married from Wexmoor Keep, in the little grey church on the estate, with the miller in the second pew. For Alaric had gone to him with no lawyer and asked his opinion of the water-wheel, exactly as she had said, and the dispute had melted in a single afternoon over a mug of ale, and the miller was now the Duke's fiercest partisan and wept, unashamedly, all through the service. I stood up with my brother. He was steady at the altar in a way he had not been in the inn-yard. The terror was all gone, there was only the certainty left. And I watched Verity come up the aisle, no longer in gray, no longer folded small, but not transformed either, not made into someone else, simply seen at last at full size, walking toward the one person who had ever thought to look. And I watched my brother's face as she came, and it was not cold, and it was not guarded, and there was nothing left in it of the man who had wanted nothing for 10 years. There was only a man who had wanted one thing entirely and got it, and could not quite believe his luck, which is, I have come to think, the only expression worth having on your wedding day. She made a good duchess. Everyone said so, in time, though at first the county did not know what to make of a duchess who noticed the second footman's name and the housekeeper's rheumatism, and the exact thing each guest at her table was too shy to say. A duchess who watched and remembered and was glad of people, out loud, so that servants and tenants and frightened young girls at their first ball found themselves suddenly, unexpectedly, seen, which most of them had never been, which almost no one ever is. She turned out to be, in the end, extremely high-spirited, the aunt in Northumberland having been quite wrong about the thread and right about nothing else, and my brother slept. Every night all the way through for the rest of his life, with the woman in the next room become the woman beside him, and I do not think he ever again in his life said that he wanted nothing, because it was so obviously, gladly untrue. I asked her once, years later, when we were all easy with one another, and the eldest of their children was old enough to fall asleep under a gingerbread stall herself. I asked her whether she had truly decided it at the marmalade, or whether that had been a pretty thing to say. She thought about it, seriously, the way she thought about everything. Not the marmalade, she admitted. That was for effect, it made him laugh and I wanted him to laugh. It was the coat, if you want the truth of it, that first night. The whole passage full of people deciding my ruin, and Lady Frampton in full sail, and your brother the coldest man in England. They told me afterward, looked at all of it and looked at me, and the only thing in the whole world he could find to say was that I was cold. She smiled. the private smile, given freely now for years now. No one had ever noticed that I was cold before, Kit. In 22 years. I had been cold my whole life, and no one had ever once said so. And he took off his own coat. She spread her hands. I have been warm ever since. That is the whole of it. A river took the bridge, and a girl fell asleep by the wrong fire, and a cold man noticed she was cold, and it turned out to be the only door in my whole life that ever opened onto somewhere I was wanted. I have thought about that flood a great deal. I have decided I am grateful to it. I have decided, she said, that some accidents are just Providence being too shy to knock. I have never improved upon that, and I have stopped trying. My brother was the coldest man in the north of England, and a flooded river made a fool of him in 3 days, and it was the best thing that ever happened to him, and he knew it, and he spent the rest of his life saying so, not in speeches, for he never learned to make a speech, but in the simple, permanent, unfakeable fact of being, every single day, entirely and openly and past all doubt, glad of her. She was never overlooked again as long as she lived. He saw to that. It was the one thing, of all the things a duke can give, that she had ever truly wanted, and, as it happened, the one thing no one but the coldest man in the north had ever thought to give her at all.